In this presentation, we will take a look at a statement of activities within our not-for-profit practice problem within QuickBooks Pro, QuickBooks Desktop. Here we are in our practice problem. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the view drop-down and selecting the open windows list. We're now going to look at Excel to get a feeling or an idea of what our objective will be. We're going to be down here focusing in on U61, which is going to be the statement of activities. This will be the statement that is similar to the profit and loss or the income statement type of report for a for-profit type of organization. In other words, it's going to be the timing statements, how we're doing over time. So it's going to start off with the revenue type of accounts up top. And then we'll have the expense type of accounts, the difference between those two being what would be similar to the net income, in this case being the decrease in the net assets. We're also going to add the added detail of the items without donor restrictions and with donor restrictions, and then the total column. So we want to give this report in a little bit of a simplified form, as simple as possible, typically. So in other words, we will typically need the statement of activities to report the expenses by both their function, what they're used for, as well as their nature, the actual use or the normal kind of expenses that we think about, utilities expense, telephone expense, and so on and so forth. But if you put all that in one report, it can be overwhelming that you want to think about. If we're giving this to someone like the board of directors, we don't want to overwhelm them with too much information. So we'd like to kind of step into that more information oftentimes. Given a report that's a bit more simplified in this case, we still have the two columns, of course, but then we've broken this out down below on the expenses as just the expenses, in this case by function, what they're used for, not by nature. Then when we get the added question, you can think about a scenario of the board of directors then asking, well, what are these actually spent on, right? And then we can go back up and say, well, here is the more detailed type of report, breaking this information out by the nature of the expense and by the function, what they were used for. So that's our objective. Now, in Excel, we had to do this a couple different ways, right? We had to make two different trial balance reports, one that's reported by nature and one that's by function, and then break out and make this other separate report. In QuickBooks, it's going to help us to do that. It's going to help us to do that by breaking out the two columns with the use of the classes, and that's going to help us to break that out. It'll be a little bit different, though. It'll be a little bit different in the way it's looking. Then we can break it out even further by then taking the donor restricted column and giving us more information by the actual items that were restricted, and that we're going to use the jobs function to do that. Okay, so now let's go to QuickBooks and take a look at it. Here we are in QuickBooks, the main report we want to take a look at, then will be the profit and loss by class report. So we're going to go to the reports drop down. We're going to go to the company and financial. We want to take a look at the profit and loss by class. Then we'll change the dates up top from 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. Then we're going to change the font size by customizing the report. We're going to go to the fonts and numbers. We're going to change the font size to 11. Okay. We're going to say yes and okay. So there we have, this is our standard, our main report. I'm going to minimize these columns. So then we just have the unrestricted and restricted. So this looks very similar then to what we have in our Excel sheet. It's fairly simple to look at. We have the restricted and unrestricted. However, the expenses here, we had first broke them out by function, what they're used for. In Excel, when we use this class feature, we're going to have to break the expenses out by their nature down here. So this is what we would normally think of it as expenses, community education, miscellaneous, and so on and so forth. But it's still a fairly easy report to first read. So you can imagine first providing this report, and then you're going to need the added information of breaking the expenses out by their nature, what they're used for. To do that within QuickBooks, we can maximize this cell, and then we have what they're used for up top in the column format, mainly focusing down here on the expenses. So the expenses now being broken out by what they were used for. So I'm going to minimize this once again. Of course, we have the same issue, whereas QuickBooks will call it the profit and loss. We want to change the name. So I'm going to go up top. I'm going to copy the name. We want to make it the statement of activities, and then we'll go back to QuickBooks. I'm going to customize the report up top. We're going to go to the header and footer, and we're going to change the profit and loss to the statement of activities. So we can make that change. We can also get rid of the time and the date and the report bases as we did in the past and say okay. And so there we have that. I'm going to minimize this again. So that's being changed. And then we have the income up top. We have the expenses. The bottom line number is also the thing that'll be different. It doesn't say, as we see in our report over here. You would think it would be the decrease in this case in net assets. But QuickBooks, of course, calls it the net income, or in this case, it's a net loss. QuickBooks doesn't change the terminology. It still says net income, even though it has a loss here, and you can't change it to change in net asset. However, if we export it to Excel, as we will do, then we can make that change. So what you want to do then is we got this report. You're imagining we're going to print this out, or we're going to export it to Excel. We're going to put it in a PDF. We're going to email it. We're going to give this first. And then we're going to say when they ask for more detail, we want to give them more detail like this and uncheck that off. So we're gonna provide this first. We're gonna get the initial questions, get the ball rolling, not completely overwhelm anybody with too many numbers, and then we'll provide more numbers as we go forward. So let's do the same process we did before. We could print this to a PDF file or print it. I'm going to print it to Excel, and then at the end of this, make an Excel document or a PDF document with all our files in it. So I'm going to go to the Excel tab. We're going to create a new worksheet, and then we're going to put that worksheet into an existing workbook. We're going to browse to find that workbook. It's going to be under the problem 2 is where I put it. And then I'm just going to open up the financial statement report and then export. And it'll actually open up the previous report that we had, the previous Excel workbook that we had, add a new sheet to it, and then put the new data on the new sheet. It's going to look something like this. So there we have it. And so now we're going to do our normal kind of formatting. Notice it always puts it in the middle, or it often does. I'm going to pull it to the right. I want to pull this to the right. So I'm going to left click on it, pull it to the right. And I'm just going to call it, I'm going to double click on the tab, a P and L. I'm going to say short, P and L short. And then I'm going to do our normal maintenance, which is going to be going to the page layout view and saying, okay. I'm going to change the splits or remove the splits by going to the view up top, going to the Windows group and removing the splits. So there we have that. Then I'm going to go back to the normal view. And then within the normal view, we could make some editing adjustments if we so choose. So if we scroll down, for example, this net income, we might want to call it, as we called it here, the decrease in net assets. So I can say I want to call this the decrease in net assets. So we can make that change. And I'm going to format it the same formatting as we have there. So it's going to be the decrease in the net assets. Now you can also do other formatting to this as well. Like you might want to get rid of the pennies here. You could do this in QuickBooks as well to get rid of the pennies. So you might say, okay, I'm going to highlight all the items here. You might want to make the negative numbers bracketed, which is how I tend to like to see them. I'm going to right to click on this. We're going to go to the fonts, the format cells. And I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to make it currency. I'm going to remove the pennies and that's it. I'm going to put brackets around it and then say okay. That's typically how I would look at it, and that'll give you more functionality for the size of the cells. So then I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save it. I'm going to look at the other report, which is going to take more formatting, closing this back out. Then we can maximize this and then export this or print this and put it on another tab as well. So I've maximized this. Now I'm going to export this to that same Excel worksheet, go into the create new worksheet, and then we're going to put it into an existing workbook. We're going to browse. There's the one we want, double clicking on it, and then export. Once again, we'll do our normal maintenance. So we put this in the middle. I'm going to left click on it and pull it to the right. So I'm going to left click on it and pull it to the right. And then I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to call it a P and L long. And so there we have that. Then I'm going to go to the second view, which is the page layout view. Page layout view, we're going to say okay. I'm going to remove the splits by going to the view tab up top, Windows group and splits, remove the splits. And then I'm going to go back over, and once again, we have this really long report. So I'm going to do this fairly quickly, just some kind of things you can do to remove, to shorten this up. You want to make it on 1 page wide, and you don't want to make it so small that no one could see it, and you'd like to have it at the same font size as the other reports. So you could kind of force it to work within the print preview, but it's nicer if you can actually make it work outside of it so that you can have the font, in a similar fashion as the other reports. So to do that, you're going to go to I'm going to make it landscape. I'm going to go to the page layout, page setup, orientation, landscape. We're going to then remove all the excess columns. Column E, I'm holding down Control. Column G, column I, column K, column M, column O, column Q. And then I'm going to right click on one of those and delete all of those. And that gets it down. We still got a ways to go. I'm going to reformat these. I'm going to pull this category over and then make the subcategory with an indentation by going to the Home tab, Alignment, increase the indentation. I'm going to do that here too with the total. I'm going to do it with the expenses. And then I'll grab the expenses, Home tab, Alignment, Indent. I'll do that with the total expenses. And we'll pull that over, and then we'll take the net income, and I'm going to pull that over. And again, we could call that net income. We might want to call that the decrease, as we did over here. So there we have that. Now I can delete these 2 columns. So I'll delete those, and then we're going to have to make some of these cells smaller. So I'm going to go from B over to I. I'll make these a bit smaller and see what it does for us. So that fits. Now I'm going to wrap the text up top. I'm going to grab these items, Home tab, Alignment, and wrap the text. Whoop, that's not what I wanted to do. Wrap the text. Alignment, wrap the text. All right, now we could fiddle with the size up here and get it all on the same page, but notice it's all on 1 page. That's going to be the major objective. Now what we don't have here, notice on our prior Excel, is we tied it back out then to the beginning balance and then the ending balance, meaning we had kind of the net income number, then we had the beginning balances to get us to the ending balances, which would be on basically the balance sheet type of report. So we don't have that in QuickBooks. We could add that down here if we wanted to. So we could take these beginning balance numbers and add them down here. I won't do it here, but you could add them down here. Now notice I made these a little too small. If I go back up top, I'll probably mess it up if I do this, but if I make this a little bit bigger, then there we have that. And I could format the numbers. If I get rid of the pennies, it'll give me a little bit more room. If I highlight all of these, right click, format the cells, pull this up. We want to make this. I'm going to make it currency. Remove the $sign, get rid of the decimals, and there we have that. Did I add decimals? I'm going to remove decimals. So there, now I've removed the decimals. So there we go. And I did that in the numbers area. So that can make it a little bit more clean and give you a little bit more space to widen this out if you need to. Then again, we can add the beginning balances if you need to, if you choose to, down below within Excel, which aren't in the normal QuickBooks report. So there we have those items. The next thing we can do is, of course, give more detail to the restricted items, something we didn't see in the Excel worksheet. And you can imagine that being the next question that they might ask. Well, what kind of restrictions are there? What are the restrictions and whatnot? That is a report we can run with the jobs report, which we'll take a look at next time.